So today's technical session is around groundwater issues. One of the things that we are particularly looking at solar is, I think, what does solar mean for groundwater? Because the moment you say solar irrigation, the obvious answer is, will it not lead to further groundwater utilization? So that's one of the overall issues that we are looking at. So that's a small part of the overall picture, but we are also quite interested at IWMI and within the CGIR to understand what's happening with India's groundwater, in the view of climate change, and how best to manage groundwater, and solar is a part of that equation. So here we have really very well-known presenters, some of the people who are doing some of the best work in India in the Indian context on groundwater. So our first speaker of the day is Professor Abhijit Mukherjee from IIT Kharagpur, and he's going to present on the groundwater security of India, Interplay of Science and Policy. Professor Mukherjee will have around 15 minutes or so. And let me introduce my colleague Mohammad Faiz. He's the session custodian, which means he's looking after all the session, anything that goes wrong.
It's only.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
You want to stand, right?
Yeah, because otherwise I cannot operate.
You can sit also if you want. I know professor don't like to sit.
No. Stand for 3 hours lecturing, right? So thank you so much for inviting me, specifically to Aditi, who has been my long friend, but when we were meeting the second time in person, every other time was virtual. So I'll be talking about groundwater security of India. Now, a statutory warning: I'm not a water manager, but a hydrogeologist. So look it from the more earth science perspective. And the work that I'll be presenting here, it's a combination of the work that we have been doing for last about 12 years, along with several other organizations across the world, including NASA and ISA and the British Geological Survey. All right. Yeah. So when you talk about water, as such, water is a big deal. But in present times, it's possibly a much bigger deal, because as we're nearing the 2030 deadline for meeting the UN SDG, and as you know, goal number 6 is specifically to access of clean water and sanitation in this planet. Now, if you look through the other SDGs, other 16 SDGs, they are also connected to accessing clean water in some way or other. But specifically, goal number 6 is on water. So as we talk about the scenario of water, it is very important to understand, where does all this water come from and what are the uses. And in today's time, I'll be talking about groundwater, which is, as you know, is the largest freshwater resource in this planet, and possibly the largest source of drinking water and agricultural water in this country too. Now, the knowledge of groundwater is not new. It has been known from the days of, if you call it history, Mohammad, and possibly even earlier. And over the years, the usage of groundwater has been there in this country. But it is only since the 1970s, possibly the true power of groundwater was realized and was harnessed in this country, like in India. And in today's time, groundwater is used in so many, different sectors. Obviously, starting with drinking water and sanitation, but also for other domestic purposes. Food production, that's a big one. Industrial, industrial production, refineries, and urbanization. So groundwater is not just water, like drinking water and food, but it's in all other sectors. So at present, in an annual context, a direct GDP contribution of groundwater in this country's economic setup is about 9%. So you can imagine, and indirectly it's about another 20%. So give and take 30% of India's GDP is somewhere other linked with groundwater. Now, this is a plot that I took from the Central Water Commission. It's a little backdated, but I don't think the numbers have changed too much. When you talk about water consumption, specifically groundwater consumption, mostly groundwater, 85% goes to irrigation. Okay, and it's only less than 6% that would possibly be used for drinking water. So when we're talking about water and groundwater, it's not actually the drinking water that is what we are worried about. It's more the food production. So we need to understand, like, what are the groundwater issues? And definitely there is this food production issue, which I'm not a real expert on. Aditi can tell you better on this. But there are some problems that we can possibly be aware of now that the winter is going off. Okay, it's coming, I suppose. All right. As the winter is going off and the summer is rolling in, you have the water scarcity. Nothing to talk about it. Everybody knows about it. And in this part of the country, it's a big deal. We understand historically. But even in the water affluent parts of Eastern India, Southeastern India, where the rainfall is quite high, and Northeastern India, these kind of water scarcity are showing up. So it is not just the water less parts of the country, but it's also the water affluent parts of the country where the water scarcity is really showing up. But then at the same time, you have water excess in other parts of the country, and you have floods. Now, many times we talk about floods and we talk about the climate change, the rainfall, and so on. But there is also a groundwater derived flood, and excess groundwater can also lead to flood. And actually, most of the floods, at more toward the the delayed sector, it is actually contributed by the groundwater. Either way, you have scarcity or excess. It's eventually translating to drinking water security, and it is not the drinking water security for us, but also the cattle that we would keep in our domestic framework. But that's just the physical side of it. You cannot stay away from the pollution, and if you are drinking bad water, you can end up with this. This is photos I didn't take from the net. These are photos I have shot myself. These are people drinking in eastern parts of India, arsenic in groundwater. And people who are exposed to arsenic and fluoride and other pollutants would get sick eventually and can lead to death. Present estimate, more than almost like 300 million people in this country are exposed to bad water, just drinking bad water. And then there is the climate change. It's kind of the white elephant in the room. I'm not an expert. There are much more stalwarts than me in here, and they can talk more on that. However, what I do understand, if climate change do happen, it's going to exacerbate all of this. So you are not looking at a like a rosy picture to come up in the future days, but it's going to be scarier. Now, if we try to understand groundwater, geology cannot be far away, and we need to understand the framework in where the groundwater is. Now, the first one, the left-hand side map, gives you a broad overview of where the groundwater is. And this is what we call the hydrogeologic map of India, simplified. What you broadly see is this, bright blue colors and the violet color. Those are the predominant colors. The bright blue colors indicate what we call the Indus, Ganges, Brahmaputra, Meghna basin in the Indian subcontinent. So the 4 mega rivers, 3 of them directly originated from the Himalayas, the Meghna coming from the Tripura side. And then you have the violet one, which is the crystalline aquifers of southern India and central India. Now, if you talk about the groundwater reserve, this bright blue IGBM groundwater like aquifer system would be hosting almost 70% of the groundwater reserve in this country. Whereas the land cover of this area is about 21% of the total land mass of the subcontinent. So you can essentially understand the bipolarity of the distribution of the groundwater. So no doubt that this IGBM is where most of the groundwater usage is. It's kind of the breadbasket of South Asia anyway, and that has also the highest population, some of the highest in the world. Now, saying that, on the right-hand side, when you talk about that much groundwater, it's also a problem that all this groundwater is not drinkable directly, because much of this water is also polluted by geogenic pollutants like arsenic, like fluoride, and sometimes salinity. And it's not just the drinking water. In today's time, we also know that much of these geogenic pollutants can also be uptaken by the crops. So the crops are not safe either. So just to give you an example, this is got published like about a couple of years back. This is the first arsenic hazard map of the country. And I worked with the Jal Jeevan Mission, where of the government of India, and we prepared these arsenic distribution in the country with the predicted risk. And the most conservative estimate is 90 million people under threat. The more possibly, the higher end, but more accurate is more like 270 million people under threat. Okay, and you can see that much of this arsenic pollution is actually concentrated in the IGBM basin. So, when we talk about the groundwater, we know that we are going through a crisis. It is one of the most stressed part in the whole planet. One of the the three hotspots of groundwater stress in this planet. But it's not just the availability of groundwater, but also the safe availability of groundwater that we should be talking about. But in the next few slides, I'll be talking more on the availability side. Now, this is a series of maps that is showing the groundwater distribution that is derived from the NASA GRACE satellite mission, calibrated with the Central Groundwater Board datasets. And what is showing you from 2003 to 2014, about 12 years of data of the groundwater scenario in this country. Broadly speaking, the violet is good, violet and blue are good, red is bad. So what you're looking at is essentially a changing scenario of groundwater as we progress through the years. So what you broadly saw was that this IGBM, which was kind of violent more toward the the earlier years of the 21st century, kind of depleted substantially in the 12-13 years, whereas parts of the southern India and western India actually got a little rejuvenated. That's another story. But what's important is this IGBM, because, like I said, it's breadbasket of this subcontinent, and this is where the maximum food production is. All these agricultural activities are. So when you're talking about the causes of such depletion, it is definitely agriculture plays a huge role, and the Punjab Haryana sector in the western part of the country, then Bihar and West Bengal in the eastern part, and the northeastern India. Now people talk about which part of the country is having the most stress of groundwater in recent times. You'd be honest to know it is not actually Punjab Haryana, neither West Bengal, but it's Assam in the northeastern part of the country. That's where the last 5 to 7 years maximum groundwater depletion has happened. Okay, so overall, there are these changing pictures of groundwater usage and depletion, which can be explained by the agricultural purposes. Now, what I'm going to talk about a little bit about, so this is kind of the mean anomaly or the mean picture of what the distribution has gone down, which is the red color, and where the rejuvenation has happened to a certain extent is the blue color. Okay, broadly. Now, what I'm going to talk about, since this conference is also about energy, so we did a little bit of experiment to understand what are the cause of depletion and what might have rejuvenated parts of the country. So over the years, we understood, well, depletion is reasonably well known, it's agriculture for sure, but rejuvenation has also happened, and we were able to map out certain steps that have been taken from the community level, the village level, up to the government level. And many of this, knowingly, unknowingly, has actually benefited the groundwater sector in the country. Again, not all of these were planned. For example, the Manrega project, when it started, it was more, giving employment to a mass of the people. But in addition, what it did, unintentionally, it also rejuvenated the groundwater. Because in Manrega, there are not a lot of jobs, the local governments would make people to kind of excavate ponds, not knowing that those ponds eventually would act as point research structures. So we kind of delimited it, handed it over to the government of India, and they realized it, doubled the fund of Manrega for the Jal Shakti mission that was used in this country. So if those are more segmented steps, there is one example that stands out, and it's actually from this state, and that is the Jyotigram project. And this is based on Dr. Shah's work on earlier times. I think Aditi also worked a little bit. So in this Jyotigram project, to my understanding, the electricity feeder line, which was like one line pre-2002-2003, was segmented out. So earlier it was 24 hours flat electricity to everyone, and electricity for agriculture is hugely subsidized in this part of the country. And that was 24 hours of subsidized electricity for everybody. But in 2002-2003, the government, the Villain government, decided to go and split it up. 24 hours electricity for households, 8 hours electricity for agricultural fields. So as you can see so this is about 20 years of plot, and from 1996 to about 2002, the groundwater was depleting, that electricity being strongly used for groundwater usage. And then from 2002 to 2003, when this policy intervention took place in terms of, separating out the electric field to the agricultural fields, you see that the groundwater started replenishing up. And again, I have only data till 2015. I think the trend has continued. And in today's time, Gujarat is actually one of the spots where we see groundwater to be bouncing back. And we think the reason might be mostly because of this, change in the policy in usage of electricity. So in conclusion, this is kind of what we see. So by and large, we have about 13 cubic kilometers of groundwater that is getting depleted every year, north and eastern parts of India, where we do see a positive picture, and about 3 cubic kilometers of groundwater is actually rejuvenating in the country. So broadly, about 10 cubic kilometers of groundwater is getting lost, mostly because of agriculture in this country. Thank you so much. We'll be happy to take any questions you might have. Yes.
Should we take now, or do we take? Can you note down the questions? We take it at the end. If that's okay, unless it's maybe one is. Yeah.
I think Divya has
Yeah. Also, Nidhi had one question.
I have a very small question.
Sure.
So, yes, election rationing was one of the measures that was proposed. Of course, it started with Gujarat, and it was done in other states also. But then something which years ago I saw in field was that farmers actually started building these large structures. Even ponds, like ponding structures, big ones, farm ponds, especially in Kutch and all, where they would store water at that point of time and then give irrigation, later whenever they needed to do that. So I actually get very surprised with your slide that yes, some of that there is evapotranspiration and some of that does go back in the ground. But I thought that was not very successful. But
well, again, of course, that's a model data, because it's very difficult to bring in some kind of socio-economic model into more like a mathematical, physical model. The model data shows that it works. The ground data shows it's kind of matching quite well. So as far as the mathematics goes, it says it can. Now, what is the ground reality? I'm not the expert, so maybe you guys can tell. Now, saying that, I'm not saying that the Jyotigram project was the only reason for the benefiting the groundwater. Of course, it was augmented by many other things, but to our understanding, that was one of the reasons.
Whole of South India, you are showing rejuvenated.
There is, yes.
Completely. So
not completely, but yeah, there is.
It's a big.
There is, yes.
Big area. So, is there any reduction in the agriculture farming, or is there any specific reason?
No. So what we understand, there are some UN initiatives through various UN organizations where they work with the farmers, like on a farmland basis. They were, rationing the groundwater usage. They were, helping them with the best practices of how the groundwater is being used, change from flood irrigation to drip irrigation and all these things. And that might have helped.
But I think Professor Mishra can also say something about the episodic recharge and climate change. So, because that's also happening in the most of the drier parts. What's happening is more of episodic. Nidhi had a question, and then we'll pass on to the next presentation. Can you hold on?
Last 5 to 7 years, Chad is where the maximum issue of groundwater has happened, and that's significant. What has
So in Assam, like traditionally, to my understanding, they were earlier using like local water sources, not that much on groundwater, but about 10 years back, they introduced the more water intensive crops, more on the northern Brahmaputra plains. And that's when they needed all this groundwater for flood irrigation. And that might have caused it.
But if you have any further questions, please note it down. We are hoping to have a 15-minute question and answer at the end. So after every presentation, now it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Vimal Mishra. He's also the host of this conference to present, and he will be presenting one of his latest paper that was published.
All right, thank you, everybody. Oh, that's. Thank you, everybody. So as Aditi mentioned, I'm a host. So I asked my student to sort of prepare a few slides. But today's, you can see that professor comes right there because I never write professor when I put my name. So anyway, so thank you, Abhijit. I mean, putting up nicely the overview. So what I'm going to discuss here is a couple of things which you may find important. Of course, our work is based on mostly, so I'm a hydrologist by training, so I do modeling. I sort of try to answer questions like, what will happen in next 2 decades? Let's say if we reverse the rainfall trends, we get the most optimistic scenario of rainfall. Can we recover the lost groundwater or not? Right, so this paper, this entire work which I'm going to present here is from one of my students. His name is Sarup Dongar. And so I will be presenting two papers actually, very briefly. And the idea is like, first is discussing how much water did we lose over the years from the Ganga River basin. Because as Abhijit also told, and if you look at where the irrigation is happening, which is the most intensive irrigation part in our country, that is Ganga River basin, Indo-Gangetic plain we call, right? But interestingly, the other things also ongoing. There are several things ongoing which makes this story very complex. And one of the thing is frequent occurrence of droughts. So if you look at the trend, last 50 years or so, where rainfall has declined significantly, that is Ganga River basin, where we have very fertile land, very intensive irrigation, very agricultural oriented. So drought is happening more often, and also climate changes there. We are pumping more and more water. And if you think about groundwater is kind of a bank storage or savings that we can utilize during the tough time. So if we deplete groundwater, what will happen? Now the question is like everybody is talking about that in climate change, we are going to get more and more rainfall. Most of the models project that. So does it mean that we will be able to recover the groundwater that we already lost? And this title comes right from there. So we did a very recently a study, and where we figured out that excessive pumping that we are doing already, that will not let us recover the water that we have lost, despite there is going to increase in rainfall by 10 to 15% in the future. So I will in summary share these results with you. And yeah. Next. Yeah, so we did recently a review paper. So this is from the review paper figure, the titled Groundwater, causes and implications of groundwater depletion in India. And there we figured out like what are the sole problems, how we can fix some of these problems, and what are the challenges, open questions, implications, and sustainable management practices right there. So if you look at this figure here, this tells us where we have groundwater-based irrigation. And this is the Gangetic Plain region, Punjab, Haryana, where the depletion has been historically very high. This is the land use map. This is the population density giving you where the most people live. And of course, the pumping happens there, right there. Next. So now let's talk about the Ganga River basin. So this is Ganga River basin. In inset, you can see how the river basin looks like. Again, the percentage area irrigated with groundwater, you can see in the blue color. This is the monsoon rainfall. You see here the trend, and also it's starting from 1950 to 2016. So there has been roughly 11% decline. On top of that, what is more important is that number of major droughts we have faced in this basin. Okay, and that's where if you put, I will show in next slide that where the groundwater pumping is happening, where the wells are. Other than that, we have also witnessed the increase in temperature. Climate change is real. There is no confusion in both the seasons, monsoon season as well as non-monsoon season. So even if there is a more rainfall during the monsoon season, non-monsoon season warming will also increase the irrigation demand. So probably there will be more pumping will happen. So what I looked at in this, what happens during drought years, whether pumping increases and by how much quantity pumping increases. Next, please. So yeah, in this here we see that wells, all these dots, the small dots are representing well, and that is the data from CG. Blue means there is a increasing trend. So you see that majority of red bells here. So that means trends are declining. Now to address any question like what if scenario, we need to do the modeling. So we set up our model and we compared with GRACE-based TWSA. So red is GRACE and blue is a model called HO8. And that represents the irrigation, groundwater, pumping. All these scenarios are human management related practices. So these are the results of comparison, whether we want to say that model is doing well before we go toward the question that we want to understand. So this is the performance of model. Then we also looked at groundwater from the well. You can see it captures the variability both for groundwater, entire groundwater and also the shallow groundwater. Most of these wells actually do not provide us real practice what is happening, because these are shallow wells from CGW database, and agricultural irrigation mostly happens in these areas from the deep groundwater. So trends not necessarily will reflect that what is happening with the irrigation, looking at just these wells. So yeah, so here these are the trends. TWSA means total water, you can say. This is the groundwater, you can say entire basin. Most of the basin is declining. Now let's address the question how much water we have lost between 2002 to 22, I guess, and that is roughly about 250 kilometer cube water. You can imagine that what is the volume. And these are the comparison between GRACE-based estimates, which is satellite based, and also our model that we got modeled. Now, what is interesting here is that if we look at the groundwater storage, what model also tells us that from where more the pumping is happening and which is more responsible for this depletion. So we find out like this non-renewable groundwater abstraction from the deeper aquifer is the primary responsible factor for this depletion. And so shallow water wells trends may not give us the entire picture what is going on, because we need to have the wells that represent where the pumping is happening. Next, we also address that those Ganga basin, there have been multiple major droughts. Now, whether in droughts, this dynamics of pumping and recharge, how that changes. So we looked at specifically drought years 2009, 14 and 2015. So here you see three colors: rainfall, groundwater recharge, and groundwater abstraction. So you will see that during the drought years 2014 and 2015, abstraction goes up by 20%, and the recharge declines by 15%. So if you add up, like it is a double sort of a negative implication on the entire system, that you are pumping more water while recharge is very much reduced. So the these droughts are putting lot of negative impacts on the groundwater storage in this entire North India, and also long-term decline in rainfall. Next. So then we started looking at this question like whether we can recover the lost groundwater. 250 kilometer cube water almost lost only in Ganga basin, excluding part of Haryana and Punjab. That doesn't come into Ganga basin. Now let's look at what is the picture of the entire country. So again, we use this groundwater well observational data. We looked at how they are correlated between rainfall and their variability is related to rainfall. So these are the correlations. But what is more important is here that sensitivity. So sensitivity is nothing but like if you change a unit, make a unit change in rainfall, how much change will happen in groundwater. Okay, so we looked at separately for drought years and wet years, and what we found out that during drought years this sensitivity is much higher than the wet years. So means if drought happens, groundwater gets more impacted than if we have more rainfall variability. Next. So now let's talk about the entire North India. So earlier we used this Ganga basin. So now we are looking at this entire North India, and this is again the hottest spot is Haryana and Punjab, where the depletion has been much more than the Ganga basin. Again, we also estimated using our modeling and GRACE data that how much water total we lost from the entire country in last 20 or so years. So it comes about from North India is about 472 kilometer cube, and for entire country is 498 kilometer cube. So that means that about 90% of depletion in India is happening from this region. Then also we see some patch here, Tamil Nadu, Chennai area, that is also started losing water very recently. Next. Now we conducted experiments to sort of see that this is the picture from 2002 to 21. Now let's say next 2 decades we get the wettest decade in entire record. 1901 till now, 20 years that were the wettest. So we put that in our model and try to see that how much recovery that can give us, because that is the most optimistic scenario, that rainfall is the wettest in last 120 years. So this blue line represents that. You can see still there is a lot of deficit, and this is the driest year. So in the wettest possible decade, we can recover 2 decades, we can recover about 100 kilometer cube out of 472 kilometer cube. Okay, so 1/4 of that if next 20 years are very bad. Next, please. We also looked at climate change scenarios. So whether more rainfall that is projected by the models, what that will do this, whether we can recover in future or not, because people see now we will get more rainfall, groundwater will come back. Answer is no, we won't be able to recover. And because if you see here all the trajectories, so here is 0, so we will remain in the negative under deficit, and we will have some recovery that is represented here. But that would be only half of that. Even if we use the most optimistic scenario for future, recovery would be at maximum the 50% what we have lost, which is around 472 kilometer cube. Next. Yeah, so these are again the warming level. So if more warming happens, we will face major problems related to groundwater. Like if we stop global warming at 1.5 degree versus 3 degree, we can again reduce this depletion by 50%. So the climate change is not, again, put a lot of pressure on the groundwater system in India, especially in northern India. That's what we can learn from here. Next. Yeah, so who is responsible? We again segregated all the factors, and it turns out that non-renewable groundwater abstraction, the pumping that is happening from the deeper aquifer, because that doesn't get recharged. So only aquifers, shallow aquifers, unconfined aquifers get recharged. So this doesn't get the advantage of increasing rainfall, and that is one reason why we keep seeing that depletion happening. So in solar projects, I would say if farmers can be encouraged to also reduce the depth of their pump from there they are pumping, that could have a huge impact on overall sustainability, because just providing the free electricity may not be the sole reason to control this. So we also need to think like where groundwater gets replenished during the monsoon season, and farmers should pump more often from those aquifers and manage those aquifers by recharge. Okay, next. That's all. So these are the takeaways. I won't read it, but essentially we can learn 2 or 3 things. One is that even if in the most optimistic scenario, we are not going to recover all the water that we have already lost, from North India. Who is responsible? Mostly the pumping from deeper aquifer is responsible. And what we can do, we can reduce the pumping from unconfined aquifers. That would have a longer lasting impact, along with the impact that solar project is having on the other things, right? And I think if you enhance the income of farmers, I think that could have a big role to play in terms of convincing them that you can get abstraction or pump water from the aquifers, which gets often recharged during the monsoon. So thank you very much, everybody.
I think we can take 2 questions. How are we on time?
We are,
Yeah.
30 seconds.
Yes, we'll take 2 questions. Yeah, Alok and then Nidhi. And yeah.
Yes, Vimal, excellent presentation. My only concern is that, I mean, how are we going to convince the farmers not to go deeper? Because if there is no water available in the shallow aquifers, so definitely for want of that, they are going deeper and deeper. So
Yeah.
So that really makes it very, very difficult, because even for the deeper aquifer, CGWB doesn't have a whole lot of data.
No. So I mean, that's a great question, and I can share what Professor Abhijit has already talked about. There are success stories in our country. One is certainly in Gujarat. We also looked at, in Gujarat, what impact or how groundwater is changing, So Gujarat is probably among a very few regions where groundwater level have come up over the last 20, 25, 30 years. So we contrast Gujarat with Rajasthan, which is a neighboring state. Both the states have received more and more rainfall during the monsoon season. So rainfall has been very favorable in these 2 states. Now, what is the difference? That in Gujarat, groundwater has come up. On Rajasthan, it is continued to deplete. Now, you may ask why.
There are so many recharge.
Exactly. So recharge and these check dams, especially that Gujarat government put under the watershed program long back, maybe 20 or 25 years back, along with this agriculture feeder supply of electricity during the daytime. These 2 factors have a wonderful impact. And so if we want to recharge our unconfined aquifer to be able to pump for irrigation from there, we have to do multiple other things. Otherwise, you are right. Convincing farmers is not straightforward, and it will not happen until the groundwater pumping can be assured from the shallow aquifers, and that is more sustainable, I would say, because we can recharge during the monsoon season and we can pump during the non-monsoon season through solar. This is a win-win situation for everybody. But yeah.
What you are telling is right, but what is being observed is, yes, that is happening, that once the farmer, they start looking at the benefit in the normal year, that the recharge is more, carryover, storage is there, the demand also increases because they diversify their crops, go for more crops and more intensive irrigation. So that way, what happens that for a long run, you kind of nullify that. That's what also is being observed.
I know, and it's a very complicated. And I think if you have convinced farmers for solar to use solar pumps instead of electric or diesel pumps, I think the same challenge could be to convince farmers to go for the more profitable crops that certainly use less groundwater, especially from the deeper groundwater tables. So, I mean, I would not say this is impossible, but it would take a lot of effort.
And then I think that will require some incentivization.
I'm sure if you secure their income, farmers can do anything. If solar is securing their income, that's why they are adopting. If you otherwise all dreams are failed.
Otherwise, unless you incentivize, things are not going to happen.
But on a counter, anything free is good enough, right?
Yeah, no, incentivization is not free, because subsidization is free. So there's difference in subsidization and incentivization.
Yeah, so sorry, I'm conscious about running time. Again, Nidhi, can you hold on? Yeah, so we'll try to have 15 minutes at the end. And now I wanted to invite Dr. Zahid Anwar, who is the director of the Bangladesh Water Development Board, And Zahid was supposed to, Dr. Anwar was supposed to come here, but his visa did not come through till the last moment, so he's presenting, but I'm still glad that he's able to join us virtually. He was a part of the team that published this really a very iconic paper that got published in Science this September called the Bengal Water Machine, that has some counterintuitive findings. So I would invite Dr. Zahid to please present his paper.
You are muted, Dr. Zahid.
Thank you, Aditi, for inviting me. Am I audible? So I have already shared my presentation. Are you seeing it?
Just respond to yes, Dr. Zahid.
Yes.
Okay. So today the title of my presentation is The Bengal Water Machine: Understanding Recharge Dynamics in Bangladesh with its Potential and Limitations. So today, within 15 minutes, I shall try to provide you the status of groundwater situation in Bangladesh, highlighting obviously what we have published recently in Science regarding the Bengal Water Machine. So I am working in Bangladesh Water Development Board under hydrology, and I am responsible for the monitoring investigation of groundwater resources all over the country, both for quality and quantity. In Bangladesh, okay, we have already two presentations, one from Professor Abhijit of IIT Kharagpur and another from Professor IIT Gujarat. So in Bangladesh also, as a part of Bengal Basin, we are facing more or less similar challenges of what West Bengal is facing. And in Bangladesh, development of groundwater is huge. If we consider dry irrigation period, mainly for Bodo rice, about 80% of irrigation water is coming from groundwater, though we have a number of rivers. And for drinking purpose, it is almost 97–98%. And our industrial sector is growing, and industrial sector is also using a huge quantity of groundwater. So what problem we are facing? Obviously, besides some water quality problem, groundwater quality problem like arsenic and salinity in the coastal belt, we are also suffering from the depletion of water table in different parts. If you see this map on the left side, we have recently in one of our study, we have quantified the abstraction of groundwater resources. So this is, you can say, the current situation more or less, and we are abstracting about 32 cubic kilometer of groundwater every year. And as a result, in Dhaka city, since last 50 years, groundwater table has been depleting about 70 to 75 meters in central part of the Dhaka city. This is obviously mainly due to the urban and industrial use, and as well as irrigation use surrounding Dhaka city. So, as Aditi has already mentioned about our recent paper published in Science, the Bengal Water Machine, Quantified Freshwater Capture in Bangladesh. We used Water Development Board monitored field measured groundwater level data, and the analysis has been led by Mohammad, who is associate professor at UCL, but we used Water Development Board water level data for about 30 plus years. So if you see the map on the right side, here we have pointed out where this Bengal water machine is functioning and where the Bengal water machine is not functioning. That means there is symptom of depletion of groundwater level. So what's the salient feature of this analysis in the Bengal water machine? We know that since 3-4 decades, groundwater has playing a vital role regarding our food security. And this incremental increase in dry season groundwater pumping, mainly for borough irrigation, lower groundwater level, and enhance the leakage facilities towards groundwater recharge. And we are calling it Bengal water machine. However, this nature-based solution to seasonal freshwater storage capture within aquifer, showing that the collective operation of about 16 million smallholder farmers in Bangladesh, whom we call minor irrigation, has induced cumulative freshwater capture of about 90 cubic kilometer from 1988 to 2018. We use field data I have mentioned and tried to quantify this volume of abstracted irrigation water. As I have mentioned, however, in many places, okay, the lowered water level during a dry irrigation period regain its static level during monsoon, but in many locations, these groundwater table declining even in monsoon. And we have analyzed data from about 465 BWDB monitoring wells, mostly installed in the shallow part from where we abstract groundwater for irrigation. And among these 465 monitoring wells, about 2/3 of wells show non-functionality of Bengal water machine. That means groundwater level, monsoon and groundwater level is decreasing or depleting. So therefore, a vital assessment and monitoring of this resource is required. So what's the basis of this analysis? I have already mentioned. If you see the left side map, Bangladesh Water Development Board has 1,272 shallow monitoring wells since about 60 years. And we collect data manually once a week. So we have 60 years manual data collected once a week. And since 2 years, we have automated of our wells, and we are collecting data 1 hour interval. So for this Bengal water machine analysis, we use these 1 week interval manual measured data of I have mentioned 465 wells amongst these 1,272 old wells. And if we analyze the hydrographs with the long-term water level data, so mostly these 4 types of trend we see. If you see the A type, so dry period, declining water table, regaining in static level during monsoon. If we see the B and C type, mainly C type, with time you see that the abstraction, mainly due to irrigation, has been increasing. So seasonal water level also, fluctuation is also increasing. And to some extent, mainly since 2000, maybe the Bengal water machine was operating, but since 2000 or 2001 to again, the monsoonal water table started to decline. So the Bengal water machine here is facing challenges. And if you see the D type, the first graph is from Dhaka city, and others are from our northwestern Bangladesh, Barind area. In Dhaka city, I have mentioned, due to urban abstraction, industrial abstraction, and irrigation abstraction surrounding areas, the water table declining rate is very, very alarming. And in Barind area, our northwestern part of the country, is depleting at an alarming rate. So these are the hydrographs with the long-term data. And this paper, okay, we have mentioned both potential and limitation of the groundwater level condition of the country. So many people, they have chosen the potential part and blamed us that we invited farmers to abstract more and more groundwater. And also there are also
From our side?
No, he has told him because of them.
Wi-Fi is well.
but,
Yeah, Dr. Zahid, if you switch off your video, I think you have some connectivity problem. You may think of switching off your video to save bandwidth.
okay. Let me do that. So this paper, what we have analyzed, actually supporting our National Water Act. With analyzing these data, we can say in which area we are facing water stress and in which area there are potentiality. So there is no controversy about this National Water Act. And now I'm going to finish my presentation soon. So we have multi-layer aquifer system, and obviously, other than abstraction scenario, other than abstraction stress, aquifer system of hydrogeology is also responsible regarding potential or limitation of groundwater recharge. We have multi-layer aquifer system. In many places, we have the surfaces covered by the recharge rate is lower on those areas, including central Bangladesh and the northwestern part of Bangladesh. For shallow aquifer, we have modeled and we did some isotopic analysis. The shallow groundwater is recharged mainly vertically from the precipitation, but also there are long distance travel of groundwater to recharge the shallow aquifers. And we had estimated the potential recharge and usable recharge. And now because of these huge abstraction and increasing abstraction in many places, the actual recharge has already been exceeded the volume of potential recharge. And when we quantify the recharge mainly based on water table fluctuation method, we have to consider again the other factors too, like the poroelastic responses to quantify the recharge accurately. Otherwise, if we overestimate the recharge, we will face again the trouble to allocate these resources. So what's the way forward? I am not going to read all the points. So obviously maintaining the water balance so that discharge must not be higher than the recharge. So, and we have plenty of surface water, we have precipitation water. So conjunctive use of surface water and groundwater is very much needed. So water budget, preparation of water budget and water allocation plan, we should go for that. Maybe in the union, the smallest administrative boundary level. And also where we have depletion problem and salinity problem, we can go for managed aquifer recharge. So as I have mentioned, to go for water budget preparation, for this we know that we need to know the demand for different uses. We have data within different organizations. If we can accumulate this data, we can prepare the demand for different uses. And then we can estimate the available freshwater resources, surface water, groundwater, and rainwater. Again, I can say that we have data to do these, to assess the availability of freshwater resources. And if we know the demand and available water resources, we can go for water allocation plan. And where we have, I have mentioned just one example, where we have shortage of water, that means demand is higher than the available resources, we can think how to collect our rainwater in the surface and subsurface. So now we are also planning to go for managed aquifer recharge. Obviously, this will be useful for drinking water supply, but I don't know how much support we can provide with managed aquifer recharge for agriculture irrigation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Jahid. Maybe we can take one question if there is from the audience. If not, it's okay. We will have 15 minutes at the end. Now I wanted to invite our co-presentation professor Anindita Sharka. She is a professor at the Delhi University, and she has done work on, I think it relates to Dr. Zahid's presentation, where he is saying that groundwater irrigation increased from the 1988. And what Anindita is going to tell us is why exactly that groundwater explosion happened in Bangladesh. So she's looking at it from more of a policy and social perspective. Go ahead, Aditi.
Yes, so I'm going to look at the trajectory of groundwater development. In the past, the first two presentations, we talked about incentives. So I'm going to tell you that, yes, climate change, rainfall, depletion we have talked about, but there is something called groundwater governance, which is actually driving the use and depletion. So it will be more clear when we look at how the government intends to use its groundwater for various kinds of use. And here, of course, we are focusing on agriculture. So here, I just want to tell about Bangladesh to understand the context, because we are from different parts of the world, I suppose. So the strength of Bangladesh's agroclimatic region is that it has heavy rainfall, rich reserves of surface water and shallow groundwater aquifers. As we just learned from our previous lecture, that the shallow aquifers are also getting recharged because of the Bengal groundwater machine. The opportunity is the low-cost technology which Bangladesh has already harnessed, which I will talk about it, and the solar farms that the current project is looking at, they are also low-cost technology. And abundant sunshine is also their opportunity. Having said all those things, there are challenges. Number one challenge is high population density. Bangladesh is one of the most populous countries. High population density means the land holding size is very small. The tube wells will be spaced very closely. More than 50% population are engaged in agriculture. That means the livelihood of more than 50% people in Bangladesh will depend on net returns from agriculture. Plus paddy being the principal crop. So groundwater is equivalent to food production and also equivalent to poverty reduction. So these are the things we have to keep in mind while governing groundwater or using groundwater. And we already talked about depletion. So there is a very thin balance on which we have to really tread. The weakness here, I would say, is the limited land area. It's a small country and land is fixed and land-man ratio is continuously declining. So let me to give you a brief history of what has happened, and it's important to chart the history because we will learn from history so that we can use that when we devise policies at present and in future. So before 1960, Bangladesh was called as a land where there is hunger, infertile land. So land was fertile, water was not available, and that's why 3 seasons could not have agriculture. So rain-fed subsistence agriculture kept on witnessing droughts, which would not have been called as droughts now, because we have the protection of this irrigation. And that's why this, with state control and financing from the state, first time the deep tube wells, shallow tube wells, and low lift pumps were introduced by huge government subsidy, under complete control of the government. Heavy subsidies were given, so we can see that 60s was encouraging the groundwater technology, and 70s state became a facilitator, because by that in 10 years all these wells, managing the wells became very unwieldy. So the government was now just the facilitator, farmers were given subsidy, and there was a complete handover of its management to private hands through farmers cooperatives. And late 70s, this was one of the landmark watershed years. 1979, Bangladesh went for complete privatization. There was absolutely no control of the state. To counter the market intervention, it went for the establishment of Bangladesh Krishi Bank, from where the farmers could get credit. So 80s, we see the highest development of groundwater irrigation, mostly by the shallow tube wells. Earlier, it was either deep tube wells, which was run by the farmers' cooperatives, or it was the hand pumps that the small and marginal farmers were using. But that led to drudgery because it was too much labor intensive and the water yield was very less. So as market was relaxed and we see the technology is such, the prices of these shallow tube wells went down. So farmers, through investment, private investment, the boom of the shallow tube wells completely changed the groundwater use scenario of Bangladesh. And then we see 1990s, the state had already started talking about depletion. But there was a problem. It could not have restricted groundwater uses because groundwater by this time has already established that 1990s, Bangladesh was declared as the food self-sufficient in food production. So curbing on groundwater irrigation would mean a problem of food security. So moreover, the other problem was that the other interesting fact was that by this time, groundwater irrigation through private investment by the small and marginal farmers had already proved to be a poverty alleviating vehicle. So it would have been a very unpopular movement to curb groundwater irrigation, whereas the government had already started realizing the issue of depletion. That's why there was no restriction, but it was decided that the state will go for conjunctive irrigation. The state will promote surface irrigation wherever it could be technically possible. So now, in the last 20 years, we see that the state is talking about energy efficiency because after liberalization, the diesel prices have gone up. The cost of cultivation is very high. So that is where our solar pumps can be very useful. At the same time, cost efficiency, net returns have started declining because cost of irrigation has gone up. There are more number of wells. So irrigation efficiency and also require all kinds of energy saving technology. So the pumps are devised in a way so that they're energy efficient and water efficient. So they are seeking more kind of technology without restrictive use. The trajectory of the policy also, to give you a very short, quick snapshot, although in the 70s, they talked about a master plan which would only focus on surface water. It seems the intention of the government to encourage food production ultimately led to encouraging of groundwater irrigation. 80s, it was the clean drinking water decade, so even UN helped them to dig many wells, which encouraged groundwater irrigation, although it was for drinking water. Then what happens? So we see that since 80s, the shallow tube wells became the winner. And from mid-90s, as I have just mentioned, now they're talking of farmers cooperative. This is related to canal irrigation tracts and national water policies talking about conjunctive use of water. And we just mentioned the Water Act in the last presentation of 2013, which says that groundwater, the wells in the arid areas where there is depletion problem will have to take license. But then another new act has come, which is Groundwater Management Pool Agriculture 2018. This is the most recent act, which talks about licensing of every new well. And the existing wells will have to take license after every 3 years. I think we have a presentation which will talk about how this new policy is going to affect the adoption and diffusion of the solar irrigation pumps, because they will be the new wells. So this is a graph which I wanted to show you that how governance had led to the use of the groundwater use. Surface water use was always very low, and how liberalization led to cheaper imports. Groundwater use increased because the management rules were curbed, siting norms were gone. Then again, you see this part, there is probably, it's on the other side of the utility curve. Professor Abhijit is nodding his head, he is an economist. So now we are here. So probably it will go down. It will be interesting to see what happens, because this is the policy that restricts any wells coming, irrespective of groundwater recharge situation in that particular area. So I would say that the groundwater development will rest on 3 pillars. So first is investment and cost, that whether government invests or private farmers invest. So cost of Cost here, I also mean running cost. What kind of energy we are using. That is very important because diesel becoming very expensive, cost will increase, which means agricultural returns will be low and farmers' income will become. Then technology and its accessibility. We can have more technology. They're talking about water saving technologies, many different kinds. And I talk about accessibility because as of now, the technology that are water saving, that are energy saving and less energy use, they are very costly. Even the solar pumps, they say that the running cost is very less. Maintenance cost is less, but only after 5 years, they will start gaining more economic benefit than a diesel pump. That is the recent empirical evidence. And then comes government's priority and its intention. So it seems surface water, but it intends to use groundwater. So without those policies, the farmers will not be incentivized and the entire use depends on that, how it will be governed. So I just thought we talked about food for thought. It's a fun word. Yes, of course, food for Bangladesh, groundwater irrigation is about food. So we have two main surges. So you see, the first one is in late 1970s and then duty-free imports. Now here, two climatic events are very important in groundwater governance. Once there was a drought in 1983, they put ban on 22 districts. Then there was a cyclone in 1988, all the bulls were killed. So they needed two-wheel tractors and they removed all standardization, all import duties, so cheap pumps and two-wheel tractors were imported. So that gave the maximum boost to groundwater irrigation because food was most important. So the state did not think about depletion at that point. But whereas, now the situation is different. In the last 20 years, it is. So the last presentation where we showed empirical evidence that every part of Bangladesh is not depleted. There is a possibility of recharge. And so scientific evidence is can inform the government of how to introduce those kinds of governance. Because as I said, it's a fine balance. And in terms of solar irrigation project, I would end with 2-3 things. First of all, in Bangladesh, only 40% of people in rural areas are connected to the grid. So yes, there is a huge potential for SIPs and the low horsepower shallow tube wells, though that is a huge potential. And initially it was thought that tube well irrigation will not be successful in Bangladesh because land size is less than 1 hectare, which Bangladesh has proved wrong through shallow tube wells. Liberalization was good in Bangladesh because that helped them buy cheap imported pumps. But it was at the same time bad because cost of cultivation increased. Basically, diesel prices are skyrocketing. So running cost can be a very big challenge. And Bangladesh being abundant sunshine vector country, solar irrigation pumps will be very. So with this, I would like to end my presentation.
Any questions for Anindita? Thank you. Yes, thank you. And this work was done as a part of a ACIR project where we had compared the groundwater trajectory for West Bengal and Bangladesh. And I'll be happy to talk more about it during the discussion. Now, may I invite Faiz to present. Faiz will present some of the findings from the Bangladesh. Please speak.
Take out the
Faiz will present. Yeah. Take out his presentation.
take out this. So I'll start already. So I'll be presenting this work with our partners, Nahid NGO Forum, and from broader looking at the country and the national scale and the state scale, we go to the field. The main question we are asking is that with all this background, where the climate change will impact groundwater, what way? One policy that is happening, despite that, is the expansion of solar irrigation. And the one concern everyone had, like with solar irrigation, farmers may start pumping more. Or if they start pumping more, what will happen to the aquifer? So this is what we are looking in Bangladesh, but also in India across 4 countries in the solar project, that how farmers are behaving after they have been given solar farms. I won't go into the importance of groundwater for Bangladesh, just to point out, this particular northwest area, these 2 divisions we are looking. These are important because these are the areas where the groundwater irrigation is highest, where the boro paddy, the contribution of groundwater irrigation towards boro paddy, the most water consuming crop is highest. So you say they have very high cropping intensity, very high groundwater irrigation, and very high boro happening in these places. So of course, it has repercussions. Studies have shown there is some decline happening over these 2 districts there. And when we say decline, we have to see not just the groundwater levels going down hundreds of meters. That's not what we're talking about. Here, even if the water level goes down below 8 meters, then the suction limit of the diesel cellular tube wells, they become unoperational. So that's where the main SCW, as Dr. Sarkar told about, they are using. So those farmers will be impacted, and already there are a number of places where for most of the year, a great part of the year, the water level goes down below 8 meters. So with solar happening in these places, would this trend continue with more of these places will go, the threshold will become less than 8 meters. And even the Bengal water machine has limitations there, which Dr. Zahid talked about, is that more we pump, more we recharge, but how the rainfall recharge itself is limited. So in these places, specifically this place you see, red and orange, in this place, the Bengal water machine may have reached its potential. So it's not something that if we keep pumping more, the water will recharge, keep on happening. So this is a real concern in this area that we have to see. Now that's where the question came up. In this area also, ITCOL has been piloting these solar irrigation. This is what they look like. So this is a centralized solar system. So they replace this 50 to 25 kilowatt of solar panels distributed in a command area. So they distribute
size district. So here we have selected the 98 plots and diesel serve the 86 plots. And this is our installation and monitoring part. We have made the logbook for the diesel pump operator and the solar irrigation pump operator, and we measure the water, how much water they applied for that irrigation, and the number of irrigation hours they start the pumps or solar irrigation pump. And the next. Okay, this is the main parts, the solar irrigation pump and the farmer selection procedure for the groundwater components in Bangladesh. So I have told before that there are 82 states in Bangladesh for the solar irrigation project, and preliminary we have visited 23 solar irrigation pumps, and this 23 solar irrigation pumps surveyed the number of 378 outlets, and it's irrigate the number of 2,945 plots, and the beneficiary of this plots are the 1,823 farmers. After visiting those sites, we have selected the 12 SIPs, and 12 SIPs cover the 36 outlets, and it's sorry. Basically, the northwest solar irrigation pumps, we have selected most of the solar irrigation pumps irrigates the boro dominated, and southwest there is very much crop diversification. And here is the picture you said the number of 6 SIP selected in the northwest part of Bangladesh and 6 SIP selected in the southwest part of Bangladesh. Here our inverters are serving with the solar irrigation pump operator, and you see the diesel pump operator. Based on their information, we have selected those SIP pumps in Bangladesh. So after the selected SIP solar irrigation pump, we have installed the flow meters for our volumetric measures, and we have installed 3 flow meters at the each selected SIPs, and you can see the working procedure of the installing the water flow meter. This is the final one after the installing of flow meter at the outlet level of solar irrigation pump. So after installing the flow meter, we need to train the solar pump operator how to input their data on the logbook. So we have prepared a solar irrigation pump operator training manual, and we have trained them in both in-house training and the practical field training, so they can easily input their irrigation information to the logbook. So here the logbook they input their plot name, farmer's name, the plot area, crop name, irrigation starting time date, sowing date, harvesting date, irrigation closing date, and reverse. So after inputting this outlet information, they are now the part for the irrigation hour. So you then the date when they start their irrigation, the selected plots, outlet turn on time, outlet starting time, flow meter reading, plot number, which plot they irrigated, the crop's name of the outlet turn on time, and outlet closing time, flow meter reading. So from this information, we can get the irrigation hour and the number of flow meter readings for each plot irrigation time. So next, beside the solar irrigation pump, we have, this is the randomized control trial. I think this is we have selected 16 diesel farmers from the east nearby villages of the selected solar irrigation pump. So we target the pump operators, and we also monitor them and training them and provide them the same logbook as well as the diesel pump solar irrigation pump operator. Here are some pictures you may show that this is the training session for the diesel pump operator and practical in the field, and we have collected information from the diesel pump directly from the field. So it is difficult to find them in house, so we go to the field and catch them in the field to get the information about the diesel pump operating and the crop information. So finally, this is the data collection procedure, and after we have visited the selected sites every season in 3 times. So for the start time of the season, mid time of the season, and in time of the Boro season, and collected from the logbook from this diesel pump operator and solar irrigation pump operators. Then basically they are put down the information in Bangla. So after collecting from their information, then we transcribe the data into the electronic format, and then the analyzing part. And after the collecting their information, we have also test the flow rate of solar irrigation pump outlet and the diesel pump outlet by using volumetric method, bucket method, and the flow meter. So is it working okay or not? So that's why we visited 3 times at the start of the season, mid time of the season, and end of the season. We check the flow rates of the solar irrigation pump and the diesel pump. So now I hand over to Faiz, so he will discuss the result part. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thanks. So after much of the difficult part has been done, and Nahid has done it, data comes to me. So we have looked at the data. So what we have, the result is that 1.5 season of data. So I will be presenting the 1 year of data what we found. And initially I expected that we will see a drastic change or drastic difference between, but yeah, field data never easy. So what we see, I'll just show there is a lot of variability. So instead of talking about solar versus diesel, I'll just show like within these locations, there is a high variability within the locations and in one location also. And it varies a lot. Number of factors, the soil the farmer has, which crop the farmer was taking. If the farmer was taking potato before boro, then the water need would be less when they sowed. For example, this shows the different outlets when the sowing was done, and this shows the rainfall. So if the farmer had in this year, if the farmer has sown their crop early, then they wouldn't have they have to irrigate more, because later in the season there was a lot of rainfall. So all these outlets which were sown later in March, they had to irrigate much lesser. So all the variability comes in before I just show solar versus diesel data. Same thing with the diesel farmers, there is a lot of variability happening. We had measured, and all this data is after we removed a lot of outliers and errors. Of course, we went in with a lot of farmers and we had to remove. And all those farmers, to just get the data, they were also remunerated. So it wasn't like they were just doing the data collection for us free. For as incentive, they were paid some basic amount to collect this data, and that was combined with our flow meter data as a double check and the rate data. What we see in the end, basically, this is, I think all of us wanted to see comparison of solar versus non-solar. And what we see, it varies. If we just leave out this first location where the SIP is half of diesel, and this is primarily because these SIP operators were located in the region, they sown their crop in late March, and there was a lot of rainfall that happened just after 1 month. And these diesel operators in the same location have sown their crop in factory, so that impacted a lot. But all other locations, the difference is not that much. It's quite nearby, either less than 10%, 10% or 10% here and there. And when you look at them statistically, there is no statistical difference between water application. So neither SIP operators are pumping less, or neither they are pumping more. You can't differentiate between these two, between solar and diesel, at least for the boro bed. And the implications, we can just to say, when I say they're not pumping more or less, what I mean to say, they're not pumping more or less for this particular boro crop. So there could be something happening outside this boro crop, which is other colleagues like Marie and Archisman are looking at, whether they're taking more crop. What we are looking at is this particular crop, which is most water consuming crop, does giving solar make solar farmers, because they don't have to buy diesel, they don't have to go to the field, whether they are pumping, lead to pump more pumping. At least for the 1 year of data and 2 years, we may confirm it that this is not the case. We also compared our data with the other measurements that have been done in the field, which is again, we did field it with household survey data. So this is the household survey data. Then Moinuddin and all have done a good study comparing electricity versus diesel farmers to see how our data compares against that. So again, the data difference is, I think, very comparable. So if you just take the average of all solar versus diesel farmers, and if you remove this particular location, then the water application rate is almost same. I was surprised 706.6, 706.8 cubic meter per acre between solar and non-solar farmers for these particular crop and particular region. So no, for at least for boro, for the first year of data, we say it doesn't. Same results, kind of very nearby, done by household survey. They also found the difference was not statistically different, though their estimates were much lesser. They had found the numbers to be 433 and 479 cubic meter per acre. Again, So this is what we have, at least from the 1 year data. A lot of time went in collecting data, but for the first year data shows us the application for this borrow crop is not that different. And the reasons, I think there could be multitude of reasons we are looking at it, whether it's a soil thing, but I think it could also be in many of these places, it's not like having solar gives you unlimited supply of water, because the same solar is serving a command area. So it's not a personal tube well that you get to on. So this is what we have for this year, for this Bangladesh comparison. Same comparison we are doing in India, and we are presenting the same results tomorrow. The implications of whether this solar and versus climate change on future thing is something Smaranika will be presenting also tomorrow. We are also, so that's one thing whether the individual farmers are doing, but to see how making this 1,000 SIPs into 10,000 SIPs with climate change will impact the overall resources is something we have to model. And that's where the modeling part is coming in. And Smaranika will be presenting. I'll be here around for 2 days. Happy to chat more on this part. Thank you.
We will have maybe, can we do 10 minutes? How are we on time? Are we 10 minutes? Okay, but I just wanted to take the online questions. I think our online participants have been here for a while, and because we also started 15 minutes late, so I think we are not too bad. So if you can go to the chat and open the chat. Yeah, please open the chat. Yeah. Yes, so do we see any question? Shaurya Patel is asking, water is sovereign issue. Is that, I think, more of a comment rather than a question. Mr. Shaurya, I think you can unmute yourself and talk. Is that question meant for somebody? Do you want to ask? Or anyone can take it. That's what he's saying. Yeah, is anybody, any of the speakers wanting to take this?
Sure.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
So, like transporter groundwater is something that is absolutely unresolved and transboundary.
Yeah.
And based on the UNESCO map, we have like 26 major transboundary groundwater systems. And the water sharing, the water delineation, like groundwater way, it's absolutely not done. And when it's between not so friendly neighbors, it's possibly more of a challenge. So these are things possibly that is going to pose threat for the future times. Like, something I read, of course, that at one time Bangladesh and India had some groundwater sharing issues. And that was not because of the volume of groundwater, but there was a contention that the arsenic poisoning in Bangladesh was being caused by coming through groundwater from India. Now, obviously, that is not a right thing to say, technically, but those sort of things are going to come. Totally unresolved, we don't know yet. However, like what he's talking about the research part, which is not absolutely correct, because Brahmaputra River, yes, the river you can control. Like China can control the Mahapatra river, but how much they can control the groundwater or flow through the transboundary systems, that is kind of conjectural.
But China can control Brahmaputra is one of those myths that keeps propagating itself, because the amount of water that China's Brahmaputra has is a minuscule proportion. So much of the Brahmaputra in India actually receives rainfall. It's not really coming from China.
I would add to that, and that's an extremely strong kind of misunderstanding. Most of the rivers, including the perennial rivers like Ganga and Brahmaputra, they are actually neither glacial-fed river nor rain-fed rivers. They are actually groundwater-fed rivers. And majority of the groundwater, like we did a mass balance for Ganga, more than 60 to 90% of the groundwater of Ganga in dry season are from groundwater. Sorry, the river water are from groundwater.
Yeah.
So Brahmaputra, even for Brahmaputra, it's the same story. There are glacial influxes, but actually down from Assam and down south is mostly the groundwater.
Yes, but it's more like, it's not as if more of the water in Brahmaputra is with China and they can somehow stop it. So I think that's the part that I call is a bit one of those myths that gets propagated. over and over again.
That's a different issue of, because not that much of water, but it has so many other issues. If they kind of put a dam or in, so that those are.
More a geopolitical issue.
Yeah. So if there are any burning questions, yes, on Indita, please one.
I want to ask Faiz, you showed that the solar farmers and non-solar farmers, their water use was more or less same. I wanted to understand because water use in irrigation depends on control, that is ownership, and the cost. So is solar pump free?
No. So,
Service, it's a service model.
so I think at the rates are also not very low. As I understand, yeah.
If the cost of irrigation with diesel and with solar is same, then water use will not be different.
It's not same, it's a little bit cheaper. It's a little cheaper, but it's not also hugely cheap. It's not as if, and then it's not as if people own the solar pump themselves. They're buying water from a solar pump.
Yes.
So I think that's the main reason why we
So I
are
could
seeing
say
it. Yeah.
So what the other study have shown is that the solar farmers are satisfaction is much higher because SIP operators are working. They're putting much lower effort, so they have more time available because they don't not buying diesel from market. They don't need to get the diesel pumped to the field. So those two factors might lead to.
Because there is a propaganda that if solar pumps are given to the farmers and running cost will be zero, it's like
It's a different, I think the model is a different model.
Faiz or Aditi, some of us may have to tell them, well, this is a different kind of a model. There is a service provider who has a big solar panel and a 5 to 10 or 15 HP pump. And they are kind of selling water, you may say, in a way. And at the rate of something close to about 80 or 90 or 100 taka per hour. And
No, not per hour. These are all bigger rate.
Bigger, right.
So it's not hugely different.
Otherwise, when you look into the diesel cost, it comes to 120 rupees per taka per biga. So there is about 20 to 30 taka per biga.
Panels between the farmers land because they are taking away from.
So this is a private company takes over. So whoever that land is owned, either they lease it or so it's not something that farmer takes it. A farmer takes it.
Farmer gets a fee.
Yeah.
The land is leased from the farmer. Usually the farmer then becomes the operator.
But you are right, this is a big concern, I think, for Bangladesh, that these are very large pumps, the panel sizes are huge. So, I mean, we did want to, and we started one intervention where we wanted to see if you can do something beneath these panels also. I'm afraid we had to stop that, but there are opportunity costs associated with large pumps and panels. But you'll also hear some other stuff, if you can address, you can reduce the panel size.
Yeah, Divya, the government has already started to do that.
Yeah.
They are using the land beneath.
You must have the acre.
Yes.
So how do you regulate?
Thank you. So right now they would, sorry.
So far, you have very little there. But I think it's not there.
Oh, that's what.
Kind of plants. So I want to move beyond the phase from one web services and how that information gets to farmers. Did you look at that or is that?
Yeah. So date of planting, but also the date of planting differed because they were sowing the potato before.
What you saw before, if you left it fallow before going for you can plant it.
So the implication is this analysis needs to be improved on adding those certain factors. But I didn't want to do it just for 1 year. So at least in May, we can do it, extend it, see whether these other factors, if we control them, whether they differ or not.
But we have found, and we have several of these sessions happening parallel, but in one of the sessions, my colleague Mari Charlotte and Otishman are going to talk about, we found that yields of the boro paddy is almost 8% higher, it is statistically higher than when you are using diesel. And the main reason is that the solar pumps are providing proper water at those critical flowering stage, the critical stages of the crop growth. That's the main reason. Even though the total volume of water may be the same, But because of the diesel has its own constraint in the sense that farmers may not necessarily have enough cash flow right when the water is needed. But these solar pumps do not have those constraints, so they are actually able to provide better water services. And we are finding that in terms of increased yields. So that's I think that's happening in a parallel session right now. We just have to clone ourselves.
That has already happened in the other room, and I invite you to the session 4, going to be happen at 2 in room number 101. There we will present about the different models and the models.
Thank you. I don't know if there are any housekeeping. I did see Shreya, but I think the housekeeping could be that we would have lunch at the same place where we had our tea. And then we will start again at 2 o'clock. These are the 3 rooms where we will be doing.